The morning of her wedding dawned with the kind of relentless rain that seemed to echo the despair in Miss Isabella Hartwell's heart as she stood before the mirror in her childhood bedroom, watching her maid arrange the delicate lace veil that would mark the end of her freedom. At 21, she possessed the kind of ethereal beauty that had made her the toast of London society, golden hair that caught light like spun silk, violet eyes that seemed to hold depths of emotion, and a grace that made her appear to float rather than walk. But today, all that beauty felt like a curse, the very qualities that had attracted suitors now serving as the chains that bound her to a fate she had never chosen. Her father's gambling debts had finally caught up with the family, and the only solution that would save them from complete ruin was her marriage to His Grace the Duke of Ravenshollow, a man whose reputation for cold reserve and bitter solitude had made him the subject of whispered warnings throughout the town. Adrian Blackwood, the 7th Duke of Ravenshollow, was a man of 34 whose dark handsomeness was overshadowed by an aura of melancholy that seemed to follow him like a shadow. Widowed 3 years earlier, when his beloved wife died in childbirth along with their unborn son, he had retreated from society into a world of duty and isolation that left little room for warmth or joy. His agreement to marry Isabella had been purely practical. He needed an heir, and she needed security. Love, he had made clear through their brief and formal negotiations, was not part of the arrangement. Isabella had met him only twice before their wedding day, both encounters marked by polite conversation that revealed nothing of the man beneath the ducal facade. He had been courteous but distant, treating her with the same careful reserve he might show to any business associate. There had been no attempt at courtship, no effort to discover her thoughts or feelings, no suggestion that he saw her as anything more than a necessary acquisition for his household. What Isabella could not know, as she prepared to walk down the aisle toward a future that terrified her, was that the man she was about to marry harbored depths of kindness and capacity for love that his grief had hidden even from himself. The Duke, who appeared cold and unfeeling, was actually a man whose heart had been so wounded by loss that he had forgotten how to hope for happiness, until a reluctant bride would teach him that some wounds could heal and that love, when it came, could be more beautiful than anything he had dared to dream. Stay with me until fear transforms into trust, and two wounded souls discover that the greatest love often grows from the most unexpected beginnings. The wedding ceremony took place in the ancient chapel of Ravenshollow Castle, a Gothic structure whose soaring arches and stained glass windows might have been beautiful under different circumstances, but seemed to Isabella like the setting for a funeral rather than a celebration. The few guests in attendance, mostly Adrian's political associates and business connections, watched the proceedings with the kind of polite attention reserved for necessary but unremarkable social obligations. Isabella walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her steps echoing in the vast space as she approached the altar, where Adrian waited with his characteristic stillness. He was undeniably handsome in his formal black coat, his dark hair swept back from features that might have belonged to a Renaissance sculpture, but there was something in his bearing that spoke of a man going through the motions rather than participating in a moment of joy. When their eyes met, Isabella saw nothing of warmth or welcome in his grey gaze, only a kind of resigned acceptance that made her heart sink with the realization that she was entering a marriage where she would be tolerated rather than treasured. "Dearly beloved," intoned the Archbishop, his voice echoing off the stone walls, "we are gathered here in the sight of God to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The words that followed seemed to Isabella to come from a great distance, as if she were watching someone else's life unfold, rather than participating in her own. She spoke her vows in a voice barely above a whisper, her hands trembling, as Adrian placed the heavy gold wedding band on her finger, with movements that were precise but impersonal. When the moment came for the traditional kiss, Adrian's lips barely brushed hers, a cold, formal acknowledgement of their new status that held no promise of affection or intimacy. It was the kiss of a man fulfilling an obligation rather than claiming his bride, and Isabella felt something inside her wither at the contact. "I present to you," the Archbishop announced with forced cheer, "His Grace the Duke of Ravenshollow and Her Grace the Duchess." The polite applause that followed felt more like condolence than congratulation, and Isabella found herself wondering if everyone present understood that they had just witnessed not a union but a transaction, the exchange of her freedom for her family's financial security. The wedding breakfast that followed was held in Ravenshollow Castle's Great Hall, a cavernous space dominated by portraits of previous dukes whose stern faces seemed to watch the proceedings with disapproval. Isabella sat at the high table beside her new husband, acutely aware of the gulf between them that seemed to widen with each passing moment. Adrian spoke little during the meal, responding to congratulations with brief nods and polite acknowledgements that discouraged further conversation. When he did address Isabella, it was with the same courteous distance he showed to everyone else, proper, formal, and utterly devoid of warmth. "To your Grace," said Lord Pemberton, one of the few guests bold enough to approach the high table directly, "may I offer my congratulations on your marriage? The Duchess is a most lovely bride." "Indeed," Adrian replied with the kind of neutral politeness that revealed nothing of his thoughts. "Lord Pemberton, I trust you are finding the arrangement satisfactory." It was not a conversation so much as an exchange of pleasantries, and Isabella found herself wondering if all her future interactions with her husband would be conducted with such chilling reserve. As the afternoon wore on, she became increasingly aware of the curious glances and whispered conversations that surrounded them. Society was fascinated by this marriage between the reclusive Duke and the beauty who had captured his attention, but Isabella could sense that their interest was more speculative than celebratory. Everyone seemed to be waiting to see what would happen when the formalities ended and the real marriage began. The answer came sooner than she expected. As the last guests departed, and the servants began clearing away the remnants of the celebration, Adrian turned to her with an expression that might have been kindness if it had not been so carefully controlled. "Isabella," he said, using her given name for the first time since their wedding vows, "I believe it would be appropriate for us to discuss the arrangements of our marriage." "Arrangements?" Isabella asked, though she suspected she knew what he meant. "The practical aspects of our life together," Adrian clarified with obvious discomfort. "I want you to understand that I have no intention of, that is, I will not impose myself upon you in ways that might cause you distress." Isabella felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and something that might have been disappointment. "Your Grace, I understand that our marriage is one of convenience, but surely you must want—" She trailed off, unable to voice the question that hung between them. "An heir," Adrian said bluntly, his jaw tightening with what looked like pain. "Yes, Isabella, I do need an heir, but I will not force such intimacy upon you unless you indicate that it would be welcome." The careful consideration behind his words surprised her, even as it highlighted the emotional distance he was determined to maintain. "And in the meantime? In the meantime, you are the mistress of Raven's Hollow Castle, and all that entails. The staff will answer to you. The household management will be your responsibility, and you will have complete freedom to arrange your days as you see fit. And you, Your Grace? What will your role be in this arrangement?" Adrian was quiet for a moment, his grey eyes fixed on something beyond the tall windows. "I will be your husband in name and in law, Isabella. I will protect you, provide for you, and treat you with the respect due to my Duchess, but I will not pretend to offer you the kind of emotional connection that you might have hoped for in marriage." The honesty was brutal in its clarity, and Isabella felt tears gather in her eyes as she realized the full extent of her isolation. She was to be a duchess in title, but a stranger in her own marriage, sharing a name and a home with a man who had made it clear that his heart was not available to her. "I see," she said quietly, struggling to maintain her composure. "Your Grace, may I ask, is this because you find me unsuitable in some way, or is it simply that you prefer to keep your emotions private?" Adrian's expression flickered with what might have been surprise at her directness. "Isabella, you are everything that any man could want in a wife. Your unsuitability is not the issue. Then what is?" For a moment, Adrian's carefully maintained facade seemed to crack, revealing a glimpse of the pain that lay beneath his controlled exterior. "The issue, Isabella, is that I am not capable of being the husband you deserve. I am not capable of offering you the love and devotion that should be part of marriage, because you do not wish to, or because you cannot. Because I have learned that love leads to loss, and loss leads to pain that I am not willing to endure again," Adrian said with quiet finality. "Isabella, I buried my heart with my first wife. What I can offer you is security, respect, and protection. It will have to be enough." The admission revealed more about Adrian's character than hours of conversation might have done, and Isabella felt her heart ache for this man who had been so wounded by loss that he had chosen isolation over the risk of loving again. "Your Grace," she said softly, "I am sorry for your loss. I cannot imagine the pain you have endured." "Thank you," Adrian replied, his voice carefully controlled. "Isabella, I hope you understand that my Limitations are not a reflection of any deficiency on your part. I understand, Isabella said, though understanding and accepting were two very different things. Your Grace, may I ask what happened to your first wife, if it is not too painful to discuss? Adrian was quiet for so long that Isabella began to think he would not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion that he could not entirely suppress. Catherine died in childbirth after a difficult labor that lasted 3 days. The physicians could not save either her or our son. He paused, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. I watched her suffer, Isabella. I held her hand while she died, and I swore that I would never put myself through such agony again. The raw pain in his voice made Isabella's eyes fill with tears. Oh, Adrian, she whispered, using his given name without thinking. I am so very sorry. As am I, Adrian said, his composure returning as he realized how much he had revealed. But Isabella, you must understand that my grief is not something I can simply set aside for the convenience of our marriage. It is part of who I am now. I would never ask you to set aside your grief, Isabella said gently. But perhaps in time you might find that honoring your first wife's memory does not require you to deny yourself the possibility of happiness again. Adrian stared at her for a moment, his grey eyes searching her face, as if trying to understand how she could speak of happiness in the context of their arranged marriage. Isabella, I do not want you to harbor false hopes about what our marriage might become. I am offering you security and respect, but I cannot offer you love. I understand, Isabella said, though her heart rebelled against the acceptance her words implied. Your Grace, I will try to be content with what you can offer, and I will try to ensure that you have no reason to regret this marriage, Adrian replied with obvious sincerity. Isabella, you deserve better than what I can give you, but I will do my best to make your life here as comfortable as possible. As their first conversation as husband and wife drew to a close, Isabella found herself both heartbroken and oddly hopeful. Adrian's honesty about his limitations was painful, but it also revealed a man of integrity who was struggling with genuine grief rather than simple coldness. There was kindness in his consideration for her feelings, even as he made clear the boundaries he intended to maintain. That evening, as Isabella settled into the Duchess's chambers that had been prepared for her, a beautiful suite of rooms that connected to Adrian's through a door that she suspected would remain permanently locked, she reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. She had entered marriage expecting coldness and indifference, and while she had certainly found emotional distance, she had also glimpsed depths of pain and honor that suggested her husband was far more complex than his reputation suggested. The Duke who could not love was not cruel or heartless. He was simply a man so wounded by loss that he had forgotten how to hope. And perhaps, Isabella thought as she prepared for her first night as a married woman, there was something she could do to help him remember. She had been forced to marry against her will, but she was beginning to suspect that the love she had always dreamed of might be possible even in the most unlikely circumstances, if she had the patience to wait for a grieving heart to heal, and the courage to show a wounded man that love, when it came, could be a source of strength rather than vulnerability. The first weeks of Isabella's marriage passed in a strange state of suspended animation, as if she were living in a beautifully appointed prison, where every comfort was provided except the one thing she truly craved, genuine connection with her husband. Adrian was unfailingly polite, considerate of her needs, and respectful of her position as his Duchess, but he maintained an emotional distance that made her feel like a guest in her own home. Their daily interactions followed a pattern that was both courteous and heartbreaking. They shared breakfast in the morning room, where Adrian would inquire about her plans for the day and offer assistance with any household matters that required his attention. Their conversations were pleasant but superficial, touching on safe topics like the weather, estate business, and social obligations while carefully avoiding anything that might reveal their inner thoughts or feelings. Isabella, Adrian said one morning as they sat overlooking the castle's extensive gardens, I have received an invitation to Lady Pemberton's ball next week. I assume you would like to attend. If you think it appropriate, Your Grace, Isabella replied, noting how he still addressed her formally even in private. I confess I am somewhat nervous about our first public appearance as a married couple. There is nothing to be nervous about, Adrian said with gentle reassurance. You are the Duchess of Ravenshollow now, and society will treat you with the respect that position commands. And you, how will you treat me? How? The question escaped before Isabella could stop it, revealing more of her longing than she had intended. Adrian's expression flickered with something that might have been surprise or regret. "I will treat you as my Duchess and my wife Isabella. You need have no concerns about my public behavior toward you." "That is not what I meant," Isabella said softly, then immediately regretted her boldness. "Forgive me, Your Grace, I spoke out of turn." "You did not speak out of turn," Adrian replied, his voice gentler than usual. "Isabella, I know that our arrangement is not what you might have hoped for in marriage. I am sorry for that." "You have nothing to apologize for," Isabella said quickly. "Your Grace, you have been nothing but kind and considerate. I have no complaints about your treatment of me." "But you have hopes," Adrian said with unexpected perceptiveness. "Isabella, I can see it in your eyes sometimes, the hope that things might be different between us. I do not want you to torture yourself with expectations that I cannot fulfill." The honesty was both kind and cruel, and Isabella felt tears gather in her eyes despite her efforts to maintain her composure. "Your Grace, I understand your position. I will try to be content with what we have." "What we have is not nothing," Adrian said with quiet intensity. "Isabella, we have respect, compatibility, and mutual consideration. Many marriages have been built on far less." "But not love," Isabella said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his grey eyes fixed on the gardens beyond the window. "No," he said finally, "not love." Despite the emotional distance Adrian maintained, Isabella began to notice small gestures that suggested he was not as indifferent to her welfare as his formal manner might suggest. He ensured that her favorite flowers were always present in her rooms, remembered her preferences for tea and food, and made subtle adjustments to household routines to accommodate her comfort. When she mentioned in passing that she missed having a piano to play, a magnificent instrument appeared in the music room within days. When she expressed interest in the castle's extensive library, Adrian personally gave her a tour and encouraged her to make use of any books that caught her attention. "Your Grace," Isabella said one afternoon, as she discovered a collection of botanical texts that perfectly matched her interests, "did you select these books specifically for me?" "I noticed your interest in the gardens," Adrian replied with characteristic understatement. "I thought you might find them useful." "They are perfect," Isabella said with genuine pleasure. "Your Grace, you are very thoughtful." "I simply want you to be comfortable here," Adrian said, but something in his tone suggested that her happiness mattered to him more than he was willing to admit. It was during these quiet moments of consideration that Isabella began to glimpse the man Adrian had been before grief had changed him. She saw it in the way he spoke to the servants, with respect and genuine concern for their welfare. She saw it in his careful management of the estate, which prioritized the needs of his tenants over maximum profit. She saw it in his treatment of her, which was unfailingly gentle despite his emotional reserve. "Mrs. Crawford," Isabella said to the housekeeper one morning, "may I ask what His Grace was like before his first wife died?" The older woman's expression softened with memory and sadness. "Oh, Your Grace, he was like a different man entirely. Always laughing, always planning some surprise for her Grace Catherine. He loved her so dearly, and she him. The whole castle was full of joy in those days. And after she died, it was as if the light went out of him," Mrs. Crawford said with obvious pain. "Your Grace, he blamed himself for her death, though there was nothing he could have done. The physicians said it was just one of those tragedies that sometimes happen. He blamed himself. He said he should never have gotten her with child, that he should have known the risks," Mrs. Crawford explained. "Your Grace, he hasn't been the same since. It's like he's afraid to care about anything too much in case he loses it again." The conversation gave Isabella new insight into her husband's behavior, helping her understand that his emotional distance was not indifference, but self-protection. Adrian was not incapable of love. He was terrified of it, afraid that caring deeply would only lead to the kind of devastating loss he had already endured. This understanding changed how Isabella approached their interactions. Instead of feeling hurt by his reserve, she began to see it as a challenge, not to break down his defenses through force, but to show him through patience and kindness that love did not have to end in loss. She began leaving small tokens of appreciation in places where he would find them. A book she thought he might enjoy on his desk, wildflowers from the garden in his study, notes of thanks for his various kindnesses. She never mentioned these gestures directly, but she noticed that the flowers were always carefully preserved, and the books showed signs of being read. "Isabella," Adrian said one evening as they shared dinner in the smaller dining room, "I wanted to thank you for the book of poetry you left in my study. I found it quite moving." "I am glad you enjoyed it," Isabella replied, her heart racing at this small acknowledgement of her gesture. "Your Grace, I noticed that you have an extensive collection of poetry in the library. Do you read it often?" "I used to," Adrian said, his expression growing distant. "Catherine and I would read to each other in the evenings. She particularly loved Wordsworth." "She had excellent taste," Isabella said gently. "Your Grace, would you perhaps like to read together sometime? I would very much enjoy hearing your thoughts on literature." Adrian looked at her with surprise, as if the idea of sharing such an intimate activity had not occurred to him. That is, Isabella, I am not certain that would be appropriate." "Appropriate?" Isabella asked with gentle confusion. "Your Grace, we are married. Surely sharing books is well within the bounds of propriety." "It is not propriety that concerns me," Adrian said quietly. "Isabella, reading poetry was something I shared with Catherine. It feels like a betrayal to share it with someone else." The admission revealed so much about Adrian's struggle with grief and guilt that Isabella felt her heart ache for him. "Your Grace, I understand. I would never want to ask you to do something that felt like a betrayal of your first wife's memory. But perhaps," Adrian began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with himself. "Perhaps Catherine would want me to find ways to honor her memory while still living. She was not a selfish woman." "She sounds like she was a remarkable person," Isabella said softly. "Your Grace, I would be honored to hear about her if you would like to share such memories." Adrian stared at her for a long moment, his grey eyes searching her face as if trying to determine her sincerity. "You would want to hear about my first wife?" "I would want to understand the woman who was so important to you," Isabella said with complete honesty. "Your Grace, Catherine is part of your history, part of what made you the man you are. I could never resent her memory." "Most women would not be so generous," Adrian said with obvious amazement. "Most women would not be married to a man who loved his first wife so deeply," Isabella replied. "Your Grace, your capacity for love is not something to be ashamed of. It is something to be honored." For the first time since their marriage, Adrian's carefully controlled facade cracked completely, revealing the raw pain and confusion that lay beneath his reserved exterior. "Isabella, I do not know how to be a husband to you while still honoring what I had with Catherine." "Perhaps you do not have to choose," Isabella said gently. "Perhaps there is room in your heart for both, love for Catherine's memory and whatever might grow between us." "You speak as if love is something that can be shared or divided," Adrian said with obvious confusion. "I speak as if love is something that grows rather than diminishes when it is given freely," Isabella replied with quiet conviction. "Your Grace, loving me would not mean loving Catherine less. It would mean honoring her by allowing yourself to be happy again." Adrian stared at her in silence for so long that Isabella began to fear she had overstepped the boundaries he had established. But when he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion that he could no longer entirely suppress. "Isabella, you are not what I expected when I agreed to this marriage." "What did you expect?" "Someone who would accept the limitations I imposed without question. Someone who would be content with a marriage of convenience and would not challenge me to consider possibilities I had abandoned. And instead you got someone who refuses to accept that a marriage without love is the best we can hope for," Isabella asked with a small smile. "Instead, I got someone who makes me remember what it felt like to hope," Adrian said quietly. "Isabella, that is both a gift and a burden I am not certain I am ready to bear." "You do not have to bear it alone," Isabella said, reaching across the table to touch his hand with gentle fingers. "Your Grace, whatever you are ready for, whenever you are ready for it, I will be here." Adrian looked down at their joined hands with an expression of wonder, as if he had forgotten what human touch could feel like when it was offered freely rather than demanded as a right. "Isabella," he said softly, "you are asking me to risk my heart again. I'm not certain I have the courage for such a gamble." "I am not asking you to risk anything," Isabella replied with gentle firmness. "I am simply asking you to allow the possibility that love, when it comes, can be a source of strength rather than weakness." As they sat together in the candlelit dining room, their hands still joined across the table, both understood that something fundamental had shifted in their relationship. The walls Adrian had built around his heart were still standing, but Isabella had found a door and she was patient enough to wait for him to find the courage to open it. The woman who had been forced to marry against her will was beginning to discover that the love she had always dreamed of might be possible even in the most unlikely circumstances, with a man who had forgotten how to love but was slowly remembering how to hope. The weeks that followed their dinner conversation brought a subtle but unmistakable shift in the atmosphere at Ravenshollow Castle. Adrian began to seek out Isabella's company more frequently, their formal interactions gradually giving way to moments of genuine connection that surprised them both with their naturalness and warmth. It started with small gestures, Adrian joining Isabella in the music room when she played piano in the evenings, sitting quietly in a nearby chair as her fingers moved across the keys with the kind of grace that spoke of years of careful training. He never asked her to play specific pieces, but she noticed that he seemed particularly moved by the melancholy compositions that matched his own temperament. "That was beautiful," Adrian said one evening after Isabella finished a particularly haunting nocturne. "Where did you learn to play with such feeling?" "My mother taught me," Isabella replied, her fingers still resting on the keys. "She said that music was the language of emotions that could not be spoken aloud." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Isabella said with a sad smile. "She died when I was 16, and I stopped playing for a long time after that. It reminded me too much of her." Adrian was quiet for a moment, understanding the pain of loss in a way that few people could. "But you play again now?" "Yes," Isabella said softly. "I realized that avoiding music did not honor her memory. It denied it. She would have wanted me to find comfort in the gift she gave me." That is a very mature perspective," Adrian said with obvious admiration. "Isabella, I've been thinking about what you said regarding Catherine's memory and the possibility of allowing room for new feelings." Isabella's heart began to race, but she kept her voice carefully neutral. "And what have you concluded?" "I have concluded that perhaps you are right, that honoring the past does not require sacrificing the future," Adrian said with obvious difficulty. "But Isabella, I need you to understand that any progress in our relationship will likely be slow. I am not accustomed to opening my heart. I am not asking for speed," Isabella said gently. "Your Grace, I am asking only for the possibility that what we have might grow into something deeper." "The possibility exists," Adrian admitted quietly. "Isabella, you have already begun to matter to me in ways I had not expected." The admission was so tentative, so carefully worded, that it might have been disappointing if Isabella had not learned to read the subtle signs of Adrian's emotional state. For a man who had sworn off feeling, acknowledging that she mattered to him was a significant step forward. "You matter to me as well," Isabella said simply. "Your Grace, more than I think you realize." Their conversations began to extend beyond the polite exchanges that had characterized their early marriage. Adrian started sharing stories about his childhood, his education, his hopes for the estate and its tenants. Isabella found herself fascinated by glimpses of the man he had been before grief had changed him, someone with a quick wit, a generous heart, and a passion for justice that had driven many of his political positions. "I have been thinking about expanding the school for the tenant children," Adrian said one morning as they walked through the village that bordered his estate. "Education is the key to improving their prospects, but the current building is too small to accommodate all who wish to attend." "That is a wonderful idea," Isabella said with genuine enthusiasm. "Your Grace, have you considered including instruction for the girls as well? Many schools focus only on the boys." Adrian looked at her with surprise. "You believe girls should receive formal education?" "I believe all children should have the opportunity to develop their minds," Isabella said firmly. "Your Grace, some of the most intelligent people I have known have been women whose potential was never fully realized because they lacked educational opportunities." That is not a perspective I had considered," Adrian admitted. "Isabella, you continue to surprise me with your insights. Perhaps because you are finally listening to them," Isabella said with a small smile. "Your Grace, you have always been courteous, but lately you seem more present in our conversations." "I am trying to be," Adrian said with obvious effort. "Isabella, I realize that I have been distant since our marriage. I am attempting to remedy that failing." "It was not a failing," Isabella said gently. "It was self-protection. But I am grateful that you feel safe enough now to lower your guard. Even a little," Adrian repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, I suppose that is what it is. Isabella, you have a way of making me feel secure in ways I had not expected." "How so?" "You do not demand more than I can give, yet you somehow inspire me to offer more than I thought possible," Adrian said with obvious wonder. "Isabella, you have patience with my limitations that I do not deserve." "You deserve kindness, Adrian," Isabella said, using his given name naturally for the first time in weeks. "You deserve understanding and patience and love when you are ready to accept it." Adrian stopped walking and turned to face her directly, his grey eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Isabella, when you speak of love, do you mean—" "I mean that I am falling in love with you," Isabella said with quiet courage. "Adrian, I know that was not part of our arrangement, and I do not expect you to return such feelings, but I cannot pretend that my heart has remained uninvolved." The admission hung between them like a bridge that could either connect them or collapse under the weight of his fear. Adrian stared at her for a long moment, his expression cycling through surprise, fear, and something that might have been hope. "You love me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I am learning to love you," Isabella corrected gently. "Every day, I discover new reasons to admire your character, your kindness, your strength. Adrian, you are not the cold, unfeeling man you pretend to be." "Isabella, I do not know how to respond to such a declaration," Adrian said with obvious distress. "I told you from the beginning that I could not offer you love." "And I am not asking you to offer it," Isabella said firmly. "Adrian, I am simply telling you that my feelings have grown beyond what either of us anticipated. What you do with that information is entirely your choice." "But surely you must want— that is, surely you hope that I will." "I hope that you will be happy," Isabella said with complete sincerity. "Adrian, whether that happiness includes returning my feelings or simply accepting them without guilt, either outcome would satisfy me." Adrian began walking again, his pace faster than before, as if he were trying to outrun the implications of her words. Isabella matched his stride, giving him the space to process what she had revealed, while making it clear that she was not going to disappear simply because she had made him uncomfortable. "Isabella," Adrian said finally, his voice tight with emotion, "you must understand that accepting your love would mean betraying Catherine's memory." "Would it?" Isabella asked gently. "Adrian, from what you have told me about Catherine, she loved you deeply. Do you truly believe that a woman who loved you so much would want you to spend the rest of your life alone and unhappy? She would want me to remember her, to honor what we had together." "And you do remember her," Isabella said with quiet conviction. "Adrian, you honor her memory every day through your kindness, your integrity, your capacity for love. Allowing yourself to love again would not diminish what you shared with her. It would prove that her love made you into a man capable of loving again." "You make it sound so simple," Adrian said with obvious frustration. "It is simple," Isabella replied. "It is not easy, but it is simple. Adrian, the question is not whether you can love again. It is whether you will allow yourself to." They walked in silence for several minutes, both lost in their own thoughts as they made their way back toward the castle. Isabella could see the struggle playing out in Adrian's expression, the war between his desire to protect himself from further loss and his growing recognition that isolation was its own form of death. "Isabella," Adrian said as they reached the castle's entrance, "I need time to consider what you have said. This is not a decision I can make lightly." "Take all the time you need," Isabella said with gentle understanding. "Adrian, I am not going anywhere. Whatever you decide, I will respect your choice. And if I decide that I cannot, that the risk is too great, then we will continue as we have been," Isabella said simply. "Adrian, my love for you is not conditional on its being returned. I would rather love you without hope than not love you at all." The days that followed Isabella's declaration were marked by a tension that was both painful and hopeful. Adrian seemed to be waging an internal battle that played out in his every interaction with her. Moments of warmth and connection followed by periods of withdrawal that suggested he was fighting his own growing feelings. Isabella watched this struggle with patience and understanding, recognizing that Adrian was not just deciding whether to love her, but whether to risk his heart again after the devastating loss he had endured. She continued to show him kindness and consideration without pressure, allowing him to see that love did not have to be a source of fear. "Your Grace," Mrs. Crawford said to Isabella one morning, "if I may be so bold, His Grace seems different lately. More like his old self, if you understand my meaning." "Different how?" Isabella asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "More present, if that makes sense. For years it was as if he was going through the motions of living without really being alive. But lately, he seems to be awakening." "I hope that is a good thing," Isabella said carefully. "Oh, it is, Your Grace, it most certainly is," Mrs. Crawford said with obvious pleasure. "If I may say so, you have been very good for him. Very good indeed." The breakthrough came on a rainy evening in late autumn, when Isabella found Adrian in his study, staring at a portrait of Catherine that hung above the fireplace. His expression was thoughtful rather than pained, and when he noticed her presence, he did not immediately look away. "She was beautiful," Isabella said softly, studying the painted features of the woman who had been Adrian's first love. "Yes, she was," Adrian agreed, "but more than that, she was kind, intelligent, full of life." Catherine could find joy in the smallest things: a flower blooming in the garden, a particularly beautiful sunset, a piece of music that moved her. "She sounds wonderful," Isabella said with genuine warmth. "Adrian, you were fortunate to have such love, even if it was brief." "I have been thinking about what you said," Adrian said quietly, "about Catherine wanting me to be happy. And I realized that you are right. She would be heartbroken to know that her death had caused me to stop living." "What have you concluded?" Isabella asked, her heart racing with hope and fear. "I have concluded that love is not a finite resource that can be depleted by sharing," Adrian said, turning to face her fully. "Isabella, I have concluded that my love for Catherine does not prevent me from developing feelings for you." "And have you developed feelings for me?" Isabella asked, barely daring to breathe. "I have fallen in love with you," Adrian said with quiet intensity. "Isabella, somewhere in the weeks since our marriage, you have become essential to my happiness in ways I never thought possible again." Isabella felt tears of joy streaming down her cheeks as she absorbed the magnitude of his admission. "Adrian, are you certain? I do not want you to feel pressured by my declaration." "I am certain," Adrian said, moving closer to take her hands in his. "Isabella, you have shown me that it is possible to honor the past while embracing the future. You have taught me that love is not something to be feared, but something to be celebrated." "And I love you," Isabella said through her tears. "Adrian, I love your kindness, your strength, your capacity for growth. I love the man you are and the man you are becoming." When Adrian kissed her, it was with all the passion and tenderness that had been building between them for months. It was nothing like the cold, formal kiss of their wedding ceremony, but a true expression of love that left them both breathless and amazed. "Isabella," Adrian said against her lips, "you have given me back my life. You have shown me that it is possible to love again without betraying what came before. And you have shown me that the love I dreamed of was worth waiting for," Isabella replied, her hands framing his face as she studied the features that had become so dear to her. "Adrian, you have been so patient with yourself, so gentle with your own healing. I am honored to be part of that journey." "The journey is far from over," Adrian said with a smile that transformed his entire face. "Isabella, I want to learn how to be a proper husband to you, how to love you as you deserve to be loved." "You already love me as I deserve to be loved," Isabella said with complete conviction. "Adrian, you love me with patience, with kindness, with respect. What more could any woman ask for?" "Passion," Adrian said with a heat in his eyes that made Isabella's pulse quicken. "Isabella, I want to show you passion, desire, the kind of love that encompasses both heart and body." "Then show me," Isabella said with quiet courage. "Adrian, I am your wife. I want to be your wife in every sense of the word." That night, for the first time since their marriage, Adrian came to Isabella's chambers not as a duty, but as a man claiming his beloved wife. Their union was tender and passionate, marked by the kind of emotional intimacy that transformed physical connection into something transcendent. "Isabella," Adrian whispered as they lay entwined in the aftermath of their lovemaking, "I never thought I could feel this way again. You have given me a gift I thought was lost forever." "We have given each other a gift," Isabella corrected softly. "Adrian, you have shown me what it means to be truly loved, truly cherished. This is what I dreamed of when I dreamed of marriage." "Even though our marriage began with such practical considerations, especially because of that," Isabella said with a smile. "Adrian, we have proven that love can grow from the most unlikely soil. We have built something beautiful from necessity and patience and mutual respect, and we will continue to build it," Adrian said with quiet determination. "Isabella, I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much you mean to me, and I want to spend the rest of my life loving you," Isabella replied, her heart overflowing with happiness and gratitude. "Adrian, you have made all my dreams come true." As they held each other in the darkness, both understood that they had found something rare and precious, a love that had grown from understanding rather than mere attraction, from patience rather than passion, from choice rather than compulsion. They had proven that sometimes the greatest love stories began with the most reluctant hearts, and that healing, when it came, could create bonds stronger than any forged in easier circumstances. The woman who had been forced to marry against her will had found the love she had always dreamed of in the arms of a man who had forgotten how to dream. And the Duke, who had sworn never to love again, had discovered that some promises were meant to be broken, and that the heart, when it healed, could love more deeply than ever before. The happiness that had bloomed between Adrian and Isabella over the winter months faced its first serious test with the arrival of spring and an unexpected visitor whose presence would challenge everything they had built together. Lady Catherine Worthington, Adrian's former sister-in-law and the sister of his deceased first wife, arrived at Ravenshollow Castle without warning, her black mourning dress and severe expression serving as a stark reminder of the grief that had once consumed Adrian's life. "Adrian," Lady Catherine said as she swept into the drawing-room, where he and Isabella were taking their afternoon tea, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from years of managing her own household and the affairs of others. "I have come because I am deeply concerned about reports I have been receiving regarding your situation here." Adrian rose to greet his former sister-in-law with polite courtesy, though Isabella could see the tension that immediately appeared in his shoulders. "Catherine, this is an unexpected pleasure. May I present my wife, Isabella? Isabella, this is Lady Catherine Worthington, my first wife's sister." Isabella rose and curtsied with perfect grace, though she felt a chill of apprehension at the obvious disapproval in Lady Catherine's sharp blue eyes. "Lady Catherine, I am honored to meet you. Adrian has spoken of you with great affection." "Has he indeed?" Lady Catherine said with obvious skepticism. "Your Grace, I confess myself surprised by your youth. I had expected someone more mature for such an important position." The subtle insult was delivered with the kind of polished cruelty that only society matrons could master, and Isabella felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, even as she maintained her composure. "Catherine," Adrian said with warning in his voice, "Isabella is perfectly suited to her position as my Duchess. I trust you will treat her with the respect she deserves." "Of course," Lady Catherine said with false sweetness. "Adrian, might I have a word with you privately? There are matters of family business that require discussion." Isabella felt her heart sink as she recognized the dismissal for what it was. "Of course, I shall leave you to your conversation. Lady Catherine, I hope you will join us for dinner this evening." "How kind," Lady Catherine replied with obvious insincerity. "Your Grace, I look forward to becoming better acquainted." After Isabella's departure, Lady Catherine wasted no time in revealing the true purpose of her visit. "Adrian, I am deeply disturbed by what I have been hearing about your marriage and your behavior since taking a new wife." "What sort of behavior?" Adrian asked with dangerous calm. "Reports suggest that you have been unusually attentive to your new Duchess, that you have been seen displaying affection in public, that you appear to have forgotten the proper period of mourning for my sister. Catherine, it has been over 3 years since your sister's death. Any period of mourning, however proper, must eventually come to an end." "Must it?" Lady Catherine asked with obvious disapproval. "Adrian, my sister was the love of your life. She bore your name, shared your bed, carried your child. How can you simply replace her as if she never existed?" "I am not replacing Catherine," Adrian said firmly. "I am honoring her memory by choosing to live again, rather than existing in a state of perpetual grief." "Living again?" Lady Catherine's voice rose with indignation. "Adrian, you speak as if happiness with another woman is somehow a tribute to my sister's memory. How can you be so callous?" "I speak as a man who has learned that love is not diminished by being shared," Adrian replied with growing anger. "Catherine, your sister was a generous, loving woman who would never have wanted me to spend my life alone and miserable." "You presume to know what my sister would have wanted?" Lady Catherine asked with obvious outrage. "Adrian, you have known this girl for mere months. How dare you suggest that your feelings for her could possibly compare to the love you shared with Catherine?" "I do not compare them," Adrian said with quiet dignity. "My love for your sister was deep and true, and it will always be part of who I am. But that does not mean I am incapable of loving again, or that such love somehow dishonors what came before." "It dishonors everything," Lady Catherine said with passionate conviction. "Adrian, you have forgotten yourself, forgotten your duty to my sister's memory. This infatuation with a young girl half your age is unseemly and inappropriate." "Isabella is 21, hardly a child," Adrian said with obvious irritation. "And my feelings for her are not infatuation, but genuine love based on respect, admiration, and deep affection." "Love?" Lady Catherine laughed bitterly. "Adrian, you speak of love as if it was something that could be summoned at will, as if the heart was some fickle organ that could simply transfer its affections from one object to another. I speak of love as something that can grow and change and expand without diminishing what came before, Adrian replied with passionate intensity. Catherine, I will always love your sister, but I refuse to let that love become a prison that prevents me from finding happiness again. The argument continued for over an hour, with Lady Catherine becoming increasingly strident in her condemnation of Adrian's marriage and his apparent betrayal of her sister's memory. When Isabella finally returned to check on their guest, she found both participants visibly upset and the atmosphere in the room thick with tension. Perhaps I should arrange for refreshments, Isabella said carefully, sensing that her presence was not welcome, but unwilling to abandon Adrian to face this attack alone. That will not be necessary, Lady Catherine said coldly. Your Grace, I believe I have said everything that needs to be said. Adrian, I hope you will give serious consideration to what we have discussed. I have given it all the consideration it deserves, Adrian replied with finality. Catherine, you are welcome to stay for dinner, but I will not continue this conversation. I think not, Lady Catherine said with obvious disdain. Adrian, I had hoped to find you in a more reasonable frame of mind. Perhaps time will restore your perspective. After Lady Catherine's departure, Adrian and Isabella found themselves alone in the drawing room, both shaken by the encounter and its implications for their happiness. Adrian, Isabella said softly, I am so sorry. I never meant to come between you and your first wife's family. You have not come between us, Adrian said firmly, moving to take her in his arms. Isabella, Catherine's grief has made her unable to accept that life must continue even after loss. But she was right about one thing, Isabella said with obvious pain. You did love your first wife deeply, and I am just a substitute, someone you settled for because you needed an heir. Isabella, look at me, Adrian said, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. So you are not a substitute for anyone. You are not someone I settled for. You are the woman I choose to love, the woman who has brought joy back into my life. But if Catherine had not died, if you had not needed to remarry, then I would never have had the privilege of knowing you, of loving you, of discovering what we could build together. Adrian interrupted with passionate conviction. Isabella, I cannot change the past, but I can choose the future. And I choose you every day, not because I have to, but because I want to. Are you certain? Isabella asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. Adrian, Lady Catherine made me realize how little I know about your first marriage, about the depth of what you shared with her. Perhaps I have been naive to think that what we have could compare. What we have does not need to compare, Adrian said gently. Isabella, my love for Catherine was the love of youth, passionate and intense, but also untested by real adversity. What I feel for you is the love of a man who has experienced loss and chosen to risk his heart again. And you believe that makes it stronger? I believe it makes it more precious, Adrian said with quiet intensity. Isabella, you have taught me that love can heal as well as wound, that it can be a source of strength rather than vulnerability. That is a gift beyond price. Despite Adrian's reassurances, Lady Catherine's visit had planted seeds of doubt in Isabella's mind that grew over the following days. She found herself questioning whether Adrian's love for her was genuine or simply the result of loneliness and the need for companionship. She began to notice the portrait of Catherine in Adrian's study with new eyes, wondering if she could ever truly compete with the memory of a woman who had been perfect in death. Adrian, Isabella said one evening as they sat in the library, may I ask you something that might be difficult? You may ask me anything, Adrian replied, setting aside his book to give her his full attention. Do you ever wish, that is, do you ever find yourself wishing that Catherine had lived, that you had never needed to remarry? Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his grey eyes studying her face with obvious concern. Isabella, what has prompted such a question? Lady Catherine's visit made me realize how much I do not know about your first marriage, Isabella said with obvious difficulty. Adrian, I have been living in this house, sleeping in rooms that were once hers, taking a place that should have been hers forever. Sometimes I feel like an intruder. You are not an intruder, Adrian said firmly, moving to sit beside her on the sofa. Isabella, you are my wife, my chosen partner, my beloved companion. This is your home by right, not by sufferance. But do you ever wish things were different? Do you ever wish you could have the life you planned with Catherine instead of the life you have with me? Adrian took her hands in his touch gentle but firm. Isabella, I will not lie to you. There are moments when I wonder what might have been if Catherine had lived, But those moments are not wishes for a different present. They are simply acknowledgements of a different path that was not meant to be. I see, Isabella said quietly, though her expression suggested she was not entirely reassured. Do you? Adrian asked gently. Isabella, let me be completely honest with you. If I could bring Catherine back, if I could undo her death and our son's death, I would do so without hesitation. But not because I do not love you, because no one should die so young, so needlessly, and if bringing her back meant losing me, then I would face an impossible choice between two women I love deeply, Adrian said with painful honesty. But Isabella, that is not a choice I will ever have to make. Catherine is gone and you are here, and I choose to build my happiness with you rather than mourning what cannot be changed. You make it sound so practical, Isabella said with a sad smile. Love is practical, Adrian replied with surprising intensity. Isabella, love is a choice we make every day, a commitment to build something beautiful with another person, despite all the obstacles and uncertainties life presents. What I feel for you is not a consolation prize. It is a conscious decision to create happiness together. And you are happy, truly happy? I am happier than I ever thought possible again, Adrian said with complete sincerity. Isabella, you have given me a life I never dared to hope for. Partnership, companionship, love that grows stronger every day. How could I be anything but grateful? As they held each other in the library where their love had first been acknowledged, both understood that Lady Catherine's visit had forced them to confront difficult truths about their relationship and its place in the larger context of Adrian's life. But rather than weakening their bond, the conversation had strengthened it by establishing that their love was not a substitute for what had been lost, but a new creation built on its own foundation. The threat to their happiness had come not from external forces, but from internal doubts, and by facing those doubts honestly, they had proven that their love was strong enough to withstand even the most challenging questions about its legitimacy and worth. The woman who had been forced to marry against her will had found not just love, but the security of knowing that she was chosen, valued, and cherished for herself, rather than as a replacement for someone else. And the Duke, who had thought his capacity for love had died, with his first wife had discovered that the heart, when it healed, could love more deeply and more consciously than ever before. 1 year later, the nursery at Ravenshollow Castle filled with the soft sounds of contentment as Isabella sat in the rocking chair by the window, nursing their 3-month-old son, while Adrian read quietly nearby. The room that had once been prepared for the child he had lost with Catherine had been transformed into a space of joy and hope, decorated with the kind of warm touches that spoke of love rather than mere duty. He has your eyes, Adrian said softly, looking up from his book to watch his wife and son with an expression of wonder that still surprised him with its intensity. And your stubborn chin, Isabella replied with a smile that lit up her entire face. Adrian, I think he is going to be just as determined as his father. God help us all, Adrian said with a laugh that would have been unimaginable 2 years earlier. Isabella, I never thought, that is, I never dared to hope that I would have this again. This? A family. A wife I adore, a healthy child, a home filled with love rather than grief. Adrian set aside his book and moved to kneel beside her chair, his hand gently stroking their son's downy hair. Isabella, you have given me everything I thought I had lost forever. We have given each other everything, Isabella corrected gently. Adrian, you taught me what it means to be truly loved, truly cherished. You showed me that marriage could be a partnership of equals rather than a prison. The past year had brought challenges and joys in equal measure. Isabella's pregnancy had been difficult, marked by the kind of complications that had claimed Catherine's life, and both she and Adrian had struggled with fears that history might repeat itself. But their love had proven stronger than their fears, and Isabella had delivered their son safely after a labor that, while long, had ended in triumph rather than tragedy. Do you remember what you said to me on our wedding day? Isabella asked, as she transferred their now sleeping son to Adrian's arms. About not being able to offer me love? I remember being a fool who thought that protecting his heart was more important than opening it, Adrian said with obvious regret. Isabella, I wasted so much time being afraid of what I might lose that I nearly missed what I could gain. You were not a fool. You were a man who had been wounded and needed time to heal, Isabella said with characteristic generosity. Adrian, your caution taught me patience, and your eventual trust taught me the value of love that is chosen, rather than simply felt. And now? Adrian asked, settling into the chair beside hers with their son cradled against his chest. Are you happy, Isabella? Truly happy with the life we have built together. I am happier than I ever dreamed possible, Isabella said without hesitation. Adrian, you have given me a love that is both passionate and gentle, a marriage that is both romantic and practical, a life that is both secure and adventurous. Even though it began with such reluctance on both our parts, especially because of that, Isabella said with a smile that held all the warmth of their shared journey. Adrian, we have proven that the most beautiful love can grow from the most unlikely soil. We chose each other not once, but every day since our wedding. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the nursery door, followed by the entrance of Mrs. Crawford carrying a tea service and wearing the kind of satisfied expression that had become her default since the arrival of the young master. "Your Graces," she said with obvious pleasure, "I thought you might enjoy some refreshment, and if I may say so, Master James is looking more like his father every day." "Thank you, Mrs. Crawford," Adrian said warmly. "Has the post arrived?" "I am expecting correspondence from the school committee." "Indeed it has, Your Grace, and there are several letters that appear to be of considerable importance," Mrs. Crawford replied. "Shall I have them brought up?" "Later will be fine," Adrian said, his attention focused entirely on his wife and son. "For now I am exactly where I want to be." After Mrs. Crawford's departure, Adrian and Isabella settled into the comfortable silence that had become one of their greatest pleasures, the ability to simply be together without the need for constant conversation or entertainment. Their son slept peacefully in Adrian's arms, while Isabella poured tea, both parents marveling at the perfect contentment of the moment. "Adrian," Isabella said softly, "do you think Catherine would approve? Of us, I mean, and of the happiness we have found together?" It was a question that had taken Isabella months to find the courage to ask, but one that had been in her heart since the early days of their marriage. Adrian considered it seriously, his expression thoughtful rather than pained as he contemplated his first wife's memory. "I believe Catherine would be delighted," he said finally. "Isabella, she was a generous soul who wanted nothing more than for those she loved to be happy. I think she would be pleased to know that her death, tragic as it was, did not prevent me from finding love again. And she would approve of me, even though I am so different from her? She would love you for exactly the reasons I do," Adrian said with quiet conviction. "Your kindness, your strength, your ability to see the best in people even when they cannot see it in themselves. Isabella, Catherine would have recognized you as a kindred spirit." "I hope so," Isabella said with obvious emotion. "Adrian, I want our son to know about her, to understand that he has two mothers who love him, one who watches over him from heaven and one who holds him in her arms." That is a beautiful sentiment," Adrian said, his voice rough with emotion. "Isabella, your generosity of spirit continues to amaze me. Most women would want to erase all traces of their husband's first wife. Most women do not have husbands whose capacity for love was proven by their devotion to their first wives," Isabella replied with a smile. "Adrian, your love for Catherine showed me what kind of man you are, loyal, devoted, capable of deep feeling. How could I resent the very quality that made me fall in love with you?" As afternoon faded into evening, they were joined by an unexpected visitor, whose arrival brought news that would shape their future in ways they could not yet imagine. Lady Catherine Worthington appeared in the nursery doorway, her expression softer than it had been during her previous visit, her black morning dress replaced by the deep purple that indicated a gradual emergence from grief. "Adrian, Isabella," she said quietly, "I hope you will forgive my intrusion. Mrs. Crawford told me I would find you here." "Catherine," Adrian said with cautious courtesy, "this is unexpected. Please come in." Lady Catherine approached slowly, her eyes fixed on the sleeping infant in Adrian's arms with an expression of wonder and pain. "He is beautiful," she said softly. "Adrian, he looks very much like you did as a baby. Would you like to hold him?" Isabella asked gently, recognizing the longing in the older woman's eyes. Lady Catherine looked at Isabella with surprise, as if she had not expected such generosity from the woman she had treated so poorly during her previous visit. If you would not mind, Your Grace, I have not held a baby since my sister's son was born." Adrian carefully transferred their son to Lady Catherine's arms, watching with concern as tears gathered in her eyes. For several minutes, she simply stood holding the child, her expression cycling through grief, joy, and something that might have been peace. "Catherine," Adrian said gently, "what brings you to Ravenshollow? I hope nothing is wrong." "I came to apologize," Lady Catherine said without looking up from the baby. "Adrian, Isabella, I owe you both an apology for my behavior during my last visit. I was I was wrong to try to hold you prisoner to grief. Catherine, you were grieving, Isabella said with characteristic kindness. We understood that your words came from pain rather than malice. You are more generous than I deserve, Lady Catherine said, finally looking up to meet Isabella's eyes. Your Grace, I have spent the past year thinking about what you said, about love not being diminished by being shared, and I realized that my sister would be heartbroken to know that her death had caused me to try to prevent Adrian from finding happiness again. What changed your mind? Adrian asked with obvious curiosity. I found some of Catherine's letters, Lady Catherine said with a sad smile. Letters she wrote to me during her pregnancy, when she was so happy about becoming a mother. In one of them, she wrote about her fears that something might happen to her, and she made me promise that if anything did happen, I would make sure you found love again. The revelation sent a shock through both Adrian and Isabella, who stared at Lady Catherine with amazement. She said that? Adrian asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She said that a man with your capacity for love should not waste it on grief, that she would haunt me if I allowed you to spend your life alone and miserable, Lady Catherine said with a tearful laugh. Adrian, my sister wanted you to be happy. She wanted you to find someone who would love you as completely as she did. And have you? Lady Catherine asked, turning to Isabella with obvious sincerity. Found someone who loves him completely, I mean. I love him with all my heart, Isabella said without hesitation. Lady Catherine, I love his kindness, his strength, his devotion to those he cares about. I love the man he was with your sister, and I love the man he has become with me. Then Catherine would be pleased, Lady Catherine said with obvious satisfaction. Your Grace, I hope you will forgive an old woman's interference. I hope you will allow me to be part of this child's life, to tell him stories about his father's first wife and the love she bore for his family. We would be honored, Isabella said warmly. Lady Catherine, James should know about all the people who love him, including the aunt who carries his father's first love in her heart. As Lady Catherine carefully returned the sleeping baby to his mother's arms, all three adults understood that something important had been healed in that moment. The past and present had been reconciled, allowing them to move forward without the burden of guilt or the weight of unresolved grief. Adrian, Lady Catherine said as she prepared to leave, my sister chose well when she chose you, and you have chosen well in return. Isabella, you have my blessing and my gratitude for bringing joy back into this family. After Lady Catherine's departure, Adrian and Isabella sat in the gathering twilight, both moved by the unexpected reconciliation and the revelation of Catherine's final wishes. She wanted me to find love again, Adrian said with wonder. Hey, Isabella, all this time I thought loving you was a betrayal when it was actually fulfilling her last request. She wanted you to be happy, Isabella said softly. Adrian, that is what people who truly love us want, our happiness, even when they cannot share it. And are you happy? Adrian asked, echoing the question that had become a refrain in their relationship. Isabella, truly and completely happy. I am living a dream I never dared to dream, Isabella replied, looking down at their son and then at the man who had become her whole world. Adrian, I was forced to marry against my will, and I found the love I always dreamed of in your arms. How could I be anything but grateful for the journey that brought us together, even though it began with such fear and reluctance? Especially because of that, Isabella said with a smile that held all the warmth of their shared journey. Adrian, we have proven that love is not about the circumstances that bring two people together, but about what they choose to build once they find each other. As night fell over Ravenshollow Castle, the family settled into the peaceful routine that had become their greatest treasure. Adrian read aloud from a book of poetry, while Isabella nursed their son, both parents marveling at the perfect contentment of their domestic happiness. The woman who had been forced into marriage against her will had discovered that sometimes the greatest gifts came in the most unexpected packages. The Duke, who had thought his heart died with his first wife, had learned that love, when it returned, could be even more precious for having been lost and found again. Their love story had begun with duty and blossomed into devotion, proving that the most beautiful marriages were not always those born of passion, but those built on patience, understanding, and the daily choice to cherish the person fate had placed in their path. In the arms of a man she had once feared, Isabella had found not just love but the home she had always dreamed of, a place where she was valued, protected, and cherished for exactly who she was. And in the love of a woman who had been forced to marry him, Adrian had discovered that the heart, when it healed, could love more deeply and more gratefully than ever before. Their son would grow up knowing that he was the product of a love that had conquered fear, overcome grief and proven that sometimes the most reluctant hearts could create the most beautiful families. And in the years to come, when young people asked them about the secret to lasting happiness, they would smile and say that love was not about finding the perfect person, but about choosing to build something perfect with the person you found. If this tale of reluctant hearts finding unexpected love, of healing through patience and understanding, and of a marriage that transformed from duty into devotion touched your soul, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring historical romances. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Would you have had the courage to open your heart after such devastating loss? Could you have found love in an arranged marriage? Your engagement helps us bring you more stories where love conquers fear and proves that the most beautiful relationships often grow from the most unlikely beginnings. Thank you for joining us in the halls of Ravenshollow Castle. And until our next romantic tale unfolds, remember that sometimes the love we always dreamed of comes to us in the arms of someone we never expected to meet.